Hi everyone, it's Toby here from Toby urbansketch. Today we're sketching a big A3 of Heceta Head Lighthouse. It's a bit more of a completed long sketch. I think it took me about two hours in real time. But I'm going to talk you through everything I was doing as I speed sketch it now. And the real take home for me from this one was all about how we can use negative space even as our focal point. So the lighthouse here is all negative space, and yet it still pops, still looks detailed, still looks interesting. So I spent a long time sort of, as I'm doing this, sketching it, working it out, how can I make this lighthouse pop despite it just being white? Um, anyway, so do watch, enjoy. I hope you do find it enjoyable. Let me know in the comments. I've also turned this and a few other lighthouses into a series of cards which are up on urbansketch.co.uk if you're interested. But more importantly, let's watch this and have some fun sketching. So what we're sketching today is a lighthouse called Heceta Head Lighthouse, and it's a rather sort of epic bit of scenery here. And the challenge is, how do we pull out the lighthouse from all that complicated background? So I'm going to start, of course, just with my fountain pen, using the back of the fountain pen, using it upside down. So we're using a very fine nib to just capture really big shapes. And you can see all I'm doing here is these really big shapes captured loosely and trying to pick out some of the houses and things. The fountain pen itself is a Lamy Safari pen, and people are often interested in what ink I'm using. So the ink is it's called Platinum Carbon Black ink. It's a waterproof ink, very good for sketching like this. So all I'm doing is really gently moving around, and when you see those dark lines, they're not a single dark line. What they are is a collection of lots of little wiggly up and down lines. And by approaching things gently and carefully, we can get those bold lines, but they're a bit more free, a bit more loose, because they're not a single bold line. They're a sort of gradual collection of little lines which builds up tone, and it's a bit more of a flexible, interesting way of sketching, I think, rather than having to press hard or use a really big pen. You can just gradually build things up. So I spent a little while really exploring what the shapes are of these various sort of man-made buildings, because they're really going to be the focal point, and I wanted them to be right before working out how the background is going to fit with that. And you can see I was just in the back trying to work out, where's my horizon line going to go? Because we don't have to stick with the horizon line we see. We can actually change it up a bit. I couldn't make up my mind, so I went back to drawing some of the background. And what I want to do is pull out these lighthouses and buildings which are big geometric shapes, straight lines. I want to pull them out, make them feel very different from that luscious green, orange, rocky, tree-filled background. So that's why I'm just moving around, playing a little bit with the background, and then coming back to all the buildings and adding in these textures again. And there's lots of little bits to do. There's so much to do in this, so that's why I keep jumping from object to object and just working out, putting in the shadows here, or putting in the sort of metalwork, the banister in front of the lighthouse. And then I moved back, having got a lot more tone into the lighthouse, I moved back to the background. What I'm trying to do here is build up the idea of greenery, of natural shapes, but also build up tone. So though I'm not hatching, this technique is very much the same as hatching. I'm using random squiggly lines to build up tone, build up value, create those areas of dark and light. And it's exactly the same as hatching, really, what we're trying to achieve, just without straight lines, with wobbly lines. You can already see, I think, how these clear shapes of houses against a backdrop of increasing tone starts to push those houses forward and make them pop out. And doing this does take a while. It needs a bit of concentration, which is why I move around a bit. Don't want to do too much in one place. And so having added that tone in the background, we can move back to buildings or move down or up and just keep the brain working, keep everything fresh so that we don't overdo something in somewhere or rush somewhere else. In the front and these sort of rocky areas, I wanted to get the idea that it was a bit different, which it is. There is some greenery, but there's also some rocks. So I wanted to pull those out with slightly different, more geometric shapes. And then having done this, we can decide, yeah, I'm going to drop the horizon line quite low, actually a lot lower than it is in the reference. And now, time for adding the colours. So I gave myself a little break between the colours and the line work, just because sometimes your brain needs a little break, needs to step away to decide what you really want to do. And I started with the sky with cobalt blue and phthalo blue. And you can see I started painting around the lighthouse, and I wasn't sure how much I was going to fill the sky with colour. But what I knew is I wanted a crisp outline, that lighthouse really pushing forward. So painting nice and wet gives us lots of opportunity to change the textures like I'm doing here, dropping in water, dropping in pigment, pulling up pigment. And I tried sort of doing some splashes and things, and I tried putting a bit of colour in the sea, and then I just thought, you know what, this feels quite empty, so let's make this blue the whole sky. So I'm just repeating the sort of same processes I was using around the lighthouse. Add a few splashes, add a bit of water, move things around. Let the sea and the sky merge together a little bit, but also try and keep them slightly separate tones. And you can see as we're painting so wet, you can just drop little bits of pigment in. So that's me dropping lots of cobalt blue in, and it will just blend and merge really nicely. I wanted to keep things clean for the colours, so I cleaned up my palette, and now I'm adding some quinacridone with a little bit of lunar earth, and I'm just focusing really on painting the light, painting those lightest colours first, and then starting to add some of those deeper colours, those greens. And all I've done here to get this green is that same quinacridone but mixed with a bit of phthalo blue, which is the same blue we've been using in the sky and the sea. And you can see now you just get these lovely blending, softly merging colours. In the foreground, I've got that same quinacridone, that same light, but this is much more of lunar earth and a little bit of Van Dyke brown, just to create an earthier, deeper tone. You can see that I'm trying quite hard to keep that little white line, the top of the railing, just to get some natural light in there. We can add white at the end if we want, but it's always nice to have a little bit of natural light if you can. And I'm still painting very much wet on wet and bringing just darker and darker tones, especially darker greens, and now some darker quinacridone, and getting some of those shapes. Remember, you can lift colour. So in a couple of places, I take a clean brush like here, and just lift out a little bit of that colour. And that creates even more variation. It just creates lovely natural shapes in all of your colours. So a really important part of this is certainly getting that variation, getting a little bit of shape, a little bit of interest in the background without taking away from the lighthouse. So I'm working quite hard at moving around, using a tissue now to pick out some light and pick out some textures. And then also recognising where's the darkest areas, and it's around and behind these houses. So getting some really dark mix in. And this is the same mix. It's still the phthalo blue with the quinacridone. It's just got a much higher concentration of pigment. And again, you can see it's still a little bit wet, so we're still getting these lovely blending and soft edges. But I'm also trying to get some lines like branches and like trunks coming in. And the more we deepen those darks around the lighthouse, the more it's pushed right into our face, right out of the image. Now I'm just trying to add a few little details, like things to suggest little leaves, so a few splashes here and there. We can then join up some of those splashes, we can add more, we can soften, we can add colour over the top. If we add a little bit of randomness and we use enough water, we can come back and change things. That's what I'm trying to achieve here. And then moving into the foreground, we've got these sort of geometric rock-like shapes. What I'm trying to do is pick those out, pick out the darkness, the high value areas, add a little bit of extra value, extra tone to them, and then that just gradually builds up a bit of shape, a bit of interest within that area. You'll notice through this whole thing I've still not actually applied any colour, anything to the lighthouse or the buildings, because my focus was push them forward with negative space. They are, after all, white. The walls are white. If you look at them, though, they're not completely white, are they? So they've got shadow. They have got some colour, some tone in there. So maybe we don't want them completely white. I knew that I wanted some nice punchy bright colours, so this is a mix of Scarlet Lake, just Scarlet Lake, a little bit of water, and we can gradually pull out just little bits that we might want, which might elevate it, whilst also keeping lovely negative space. So the other bit we just said is there is some tone and value in there. It's not totally white, not the sort of all totally bright. So coming in here with a little bit of Payne's grey, very watery Payne's grey, and just bringing out shadows. And we can find shadows in our reference. We can also invent shadows, or we can exaggerate shadows. Exaggerating shadows is a lovely way of making things a bit more dramatic. And inventing shadows is sometimes necessary to make an image feel complete, perhaps because you've simplified it in a way which makes the original shadows not quite work. You can use the same shadow colour to intensify some of the natural areas as well. So some of these rocks especially will be generating natural shadows. And then just adding a few splashes again. It's an effect I really like. Some people say, why do you do it? It looks like a mistake. For me, it adds a little bit of life and energy, and I like not to be able to control everything. The reason I had my hand in front was to direct the splashes so that I can have a little bit of control, essentially, so that things are going to go approximately where I want them. So having done all of that, I've let it dry, and we are back on to a bit of pen work. And so I'm using the same pen, still upside down. You find with watercolour pen, after you put watercolour paper, after you put watercolour on it, water on it, becomes more absorbent, so your lines are automatically quite a lot bolder, which isn't a problem, but it's just something to be aware of. And all I'm trying to do now is pick out some of those really important areas, those important lines, and pick out a few perhaps extra details. So making a bit more of this railing which goes around in front, making it feel more of a feature of the image, and then picking out that outline between land and sky as well. In the rocks, I often think this is where rocks sort of come alive, become really interesting. You've applied all these textures, all these shapes, and now when you go back and you bring outline some of those shapes you've made, suddenly there's so much more interest, sort of vitality going on in there. And it can work the same with natural greenery as well, just making different shapes here. So this is more random, more higgledy-piggledy, but still just trying to pick out those areas of light and dark and just exaggerate them a little. Within our buildings, we're just creating little extra touches. So, maybe smoothing a line, maybe in a couple of places, making sure that there's a nice difference between the dark on the outside of the lighthouse and the light that is the lighthouse itself. And you can tell when I concentrate, because that's when I'm sort of leaning so far forward and my head's blocking out some of the image. So sorry about that, but it's because I'm having to think and work out exactly where I'm going. Now using this is a Posca pen, so it's a white acrylic marker. This is very simple. We can add a bit of colour at the end. It's not quite as natural, and I never quite like it as much as if I've managed to plan and leave that white space. But I think it does work very effectively for a few little touches here and there. And now, of course, is the big reveal. So I think it's amazing how when you pull off that tape and you have that crisp outline, you're left with a really beautiful image, something which is so much better than perhaps you were worried it might be before you took off that tape. Anyway, this is my completed image. As you can see, it looks great in a frame. Everything looks great in a frame, of course. And I've turned it into a series of cards as well, along with some other lighthouses I did as a project over a month in September and October. And they're all up on my website, urbansketch.co.uk. But more importantly, I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope that it inspires you to have a bit of fun. Try different ways of making things pop out. So having a lot of negative space as your focal point is a really interesting way of making things pop out and come forward. If you do enjoy, please do like, subscribe, and thank you very much for watching.